Hello, and welcome back to Chagpar MD. I'm Dr. Anise Chagpar. I'm so glad that you found this video. Have you ever wondered what the difference is between an apple-shaped body and a pear-shaped body? Or whether where you carry your weight or your body fat makes a difference to your overall health? Have you heard the terms subcutaneous versus visceral fat and wondered what the health implications were? Or perhaps more importantly, what you could do about it? Well, this week we're going to talk all about body fat distribution and why it's important and what you need to know. Now, in previous videos, we have talked about how to estimate your percent body fat. This week, we're going to talk about what it means. So what do you say? Let's get started. So again, this video is all about body fat distribution, whether it's that body fat that encompasses your organs, the visceral fat, or whether it's subcutaneous fat, that fat that's right underneath the skin. What are the implications for this in terms of your overall health? And perhaps more importantly, what can you do about it? So let's get started. Now, many people used to think about this as the difference between apples and pears. Apples were people who really carried much of their body fat around their midsection, whereas pear-shaped bodies were people who really carried most of their body fat in their hips. Now, this has some implications in terms of our health benefits. So, apple people who tend to hold more weight around their midsection, they have a larger waist circumference, and they have a higher risk of heart disease and diabetes because this is really associated with visceral fat distribution. That is to say, that fat that encompasses and envelops our inner organs. Now, the pear-shaped bodies are people who hold more of their weights around their hips, thighs, and buttocks. They have a larger hip circumference, and while, yes, they have less of a risk of heart disease than the apples, if you're overweight, regardless of where that weight is distributed, that has some serious implications in terms of your health. Now, we've had other videos talking about how to start losing weight, and I'll link those in the dialog box below. But let's really dive into this whole difference between where body fat is located, whether around our midsections in terms of visceral fat, or whether it's more subcutaneous. So here is a CT scan, and in the video that we talked about in terms of measuring percent body fat, one of the things we pointed out was that CT and MRI can really give you a sense of where that fat is distributed. So subcutaneous fat is right below the skin and tends to have less health implications than visceral fat, which is that fat that envelops all of our internal organs. So how do you measure visceral fat? Visceral fat is really 10% of all of your body fat. So if you go back to the video on estimating your percent body fat, you can get an idea of how much visceral fat you have by estimating that it's about 10% of whatever your body fat is. Now, for women, your waist circumference should really be less than 35 inches. And for men, it should be less than 40 inches. If it is more than these numbers, then that means that you're obese. And the implications are that this is an abnormally high rate of visceral fat and can have some serious health implications in terms of your health. Now, the other way that we can measure body fat, as I showed you before, was with CT and MRI or a body fat analyzer. These oftentimes will give you a body fat measurement between 1 and 59. And if this is more than 13, again, you have an abnormally high amount of visceral fat. Now, remember, your body mass index is not the same as visceral fat. It's a good measure of how obese you are, and certainly we use BMI as a good surrogate measure for your overall health in terms of obesity. Now, we have a video talking about the 5 numbers you need to know, And one of them clearly is your BMI, but another is your waist circumference. And the reason for that is because your waist circumference really is a measure more of your visceral fat. We know that there are people who are what we call skinny fat. They have a normal BMI, but they have an abnormally high visceral fat. This tends to be about 22% of men and 8% of women who fall into this category of being skinny fat. And despite the fact that they have a normal BMI, they suffer all of the health consequences of people who have higher visceral fat levels. So, what are those health consequences? And why do they occur? Well, when we think about visceral fat, it really increases a number of pro inflammatory mediators, things like IL-6, TNF alpha, IL-1 beta, and others. And so, what happens is it increases your risk of a whole host of things, from insulin resistance to diabetes to cancer to heart disease, stroke, and Alzheimer's. And if we think about those three on the bottom, cancer, heart disease, and stroke, those are three of the biggest killers of Americans today. And so thinking about what you can do to reduce your visceral fat has real implications in terms of your overall morbidity and mortality, how long you live, and the quality of your life. So what can you do about it? Well, you may have seen this slide before. This was a slide when we talked about what we can do to reduce obesity, and we all know the factors that go into this. It's really a combination of diet, inactivity, and stress. But let's break it down and give you some practical tips and tricks on how you can improve all of these metrics to really have an impact in terms of obesity, particularly when it comes to visceral fat. So, in terms of your diet, there have been a number of studies that have shown that a low carb, high protein diet can really impact visceral obesity. You want to avoid added sugars. Most added sugars are about 50% fructose, and there was a study that simply exchanged fructose with starch of equal caloric value. So, in other words, they kept the number of calories the same, but they just traded out the added sugars for starch. And what did they find? They found that they could reduce visceral fat by 10%. That's huge. Avoiding alcohol. Alcohol really does deposit fat around our midsection. And we all know that alcohol actually can deposit fat in our liver, causing something called fatty liver. Well, that's a measure of visceral obesity as well. You want to particularly avoid trans fat. And we have another video coming out on all about trans fats. But suffice it to say that trans fats are really terrible when it comes to cardiac health and visceral obesity. What about fiber? I know, I'm going to say it again. We have another video coming out on fiber. Please hit subscribe and the notify button, and you will get these videos as and when they come out. And I promise you, they're coming. But the Coles Notes version, at least for now, is this. Increasing fiber, and particularly soluble fiber, can really impact visceral fat. So if you increase soluble fiber by 10%, studies have found that you will reduce visceral fat by 3.4%. And what about other things that you can do? Well, we know that just simply reducing your overall obesity, your overall weight, and getting into that ideal body weight range will certainly help with visceral obesity as well, because while BMI is not strictly associated with visceral fat, they are correlated. Now, we had talked about a number of different ways to lose weight, one of which was intermittent fasting, and I will leave you the link for that video in the description box below. But there have been studies that have found that with intermittent fasting, you can reduce visceral fat by 4 to 7% over 6 to 24 weeks. Now remember, as I always say, it's all about consistency. And you want to try to build in some of these good habits to really address obesity and visceral fat. What about exercise? Exercise is another one of these things that has been shown over and over again to have numerous health benefits, including reducing visceral fat. What's really recommended here is moderate to high intensity aerobic exercise. That means getting your heart rate up. And it's recommended that you get about 150 minutes per week. Now remember, that does not have to be all at the same time. Many of us had recommended for decades that this was 30 minutes a day. Well, 30 minutes a day times 5 days is 150 minutes per week. But what we're realizing now is that even small increments of time all add up. So if you can't do moderate to high intensity aerobic exercise for half an hour at a stretch, that's fine. Go for a brisk 10-minute walk. Do that several times a day. Try to get this exercise in because it really will address visceral fat and so many other important health benefits. And what about sleep? Well, sleep and stress play a key role as well. We all know that stress leads to cortisol, a hormone that's secreted, which increases visceral fat. That's really why we carry so much of that visceral fat around our midsection, because that's where cortisol plays the biggest role. Sleep is important in this, and we're beginning to discover that it really is important not just in terms of reducing our stress, but in terms of reducing visceral fat. There was a study that looked at this and found that people who increased their sleep from less than 6 hours a night to 7 to 8 hours a night actually reduced their visceral fat gain by about 26%. That's more than a quarter. That's huge. Well, if you want more information or tips and tricks on how you can improve your sleep quality in terms of helping you to achieve better health, we have a video coming up on that too. Again, hit subscribe. It will come to your inbox. But I'm going to leave you with this final mnemonic. And this is really something that I think will help you to think about how you can reduce your overall weight as well as visceral obesity. And quite frankly, how you can simply live a more healthy life. It's called the SMILE score. So make sure that S, you're sleeping enough, M, you're moving your body, getting enough exercise every day, I, that you're inhaling and exhaling, making sure that you're really dealing with your stress, L, that you're loving and connecting and making sure that you have human connections that are so important to our overall happiness, and E, eating to nourish, eating healthfully and really paying attention to making sure that you're getting the nutrients that you need and taking care of your body. I hope all of this has been helpful to you. If it has been, please like and share it. Let me know in the comment box below other tips and tricks that you'd like to see, other topics that you want to see covered. My goal is to provide you with evidence-based data that can help you to live your best life. And please be sure to subscribe. I know that there's a lot of content that I have in the pipeline that isn't yet out, so please subscribe. Hit the notify button so that you get this content to your inbox and you don't miss out. Until next week, I'm Dr. Anise Chagpar wishing you all a safe and healthy week.